Hello guys, welcome to the Parson series, and today we will be continuing with our lens and we will be focusing on the treatment part. In the last sessions we have seen already with the different kinds of cataract. Now we first start with the treatment of the developmental cataract. We know that the treatment aspect of the cataract is different in the developmental cataract as well as in the acquired cataract. So before planning the treatment, what you have to do, you have to take a detailed history and careful examination has to be taken. Now here you cannot forego the importance of history and examination. Obviously history and examination, especially when you are dealing with the congenital cataracts and the developmental cataracts, are very, very important. And that gives you very important sphere of questions also, like what kind of symptoms you have in a particular patient related to the cataract, what kind of questions you are going to ask, right? So we will be looking at this. Basic assessment of the child vision, you have to see the ocular status, you have to see, then you have to measure the intraocular pressure, the fundus examination, because there could be retinoblastoma. Now here comes the importance of the DD of leukocoria. Why we are doing this? Because you know that if you look at the DD of the leukocoria, you have got so many things. Let's revise once. We can have the congenital cataract as we are having here. So apart from the congenital cataract, what are the things I can have? We can have the PHPV, we can have a retinopathy of prematurity, but one of the most severe thing that could be there in this baby is actually the retinoblastoma. And it is said that if a baby is less than 3 years old and we have got a whitish pupillary reflex, we have got leukocoria, then it is always safe to consider it as a case of retinoblastoma unless proved otherwise. So that is very, very important, because it's always better to overestimate the tumors rather than underestimation. So that is the whole idea, that why they actually want to do the fundus examination under dilatation. That is very, very important. In the same respect, we can also do the B-scan ultrasonography. So they can ask you that a baby is coming with the leukocoria, what are the things you are going to do? So I want to check the vision, I want to see the ocular status, I want to check the intraocular pressure, I want to do the fundus under dilatation, then even the B-scan ultrasound to look at the complications, because even if I have retinoblastoma, that can lead to retinal detachment. So to assess the posterior segment of the eye, we can have the associated retinal detachment or the retinoblastoma in a child with the total cataract. Sometimes what happens, we have got the retinoblastoma, and you know that even a long lasting retinoblastoma can also lead to the cataract. So there will be haziness, you are not able to see the fundus in those cases, okay. Then A-scan ultrasonography to record and compare the axial lengths of the two eyes, refraction by retinoscopy under atropine should be done in the partial cataract, and assessment of the density of the cataract is made based on the child's vision and the visibility of the fundus on ophthalmoscopy, because you are not able to do the slit lamp examination in cases of children. Otherwise, for the density, what we are doing is we are using the slit lamp examination. Okay, now this is very, very important, ultra important. The laboratory investigations for the diagnosis of bilateral non-hereditary pediatric cataract, and I can bet you that we can get direct questions from this. Okay, this has been included, that's why in your app also the important box here. So you have to see that we have got certain blood tests and urine tests that are necessary. So you can get a direct question, you can also get a all except MCQ. You can also get a all except MCQ on this, all except MCQs, right? So what are the things they have given? We have got the blood test, we have got the urine test. So blood test, what they are doing, first of all, they are doing the serum biochemistry, because we have to check the levels of the blood glucose, calcium and phosphorus, because we know hypoglycemia, hypocalcemia, hypophosphatemia, all these are important for your etiologies as for the cataract. Then we have got the RBC transferase as well as the galactokinase level. We can have the what you called as galactosemia, very, very important. So we can check for the galactokinase levels, we have to check for the RBC transferase levels, and very, very important, the serology for estimating the titers of antibody, because we can have a lot of infections, especially the TORCH group of infections are very, very important. Toxoplasmosis can cause the cataract, rubella is there, we have got the herpes. There are so many infections, but which one is most important, most severe is your rubella. And even the toxoplasmosis, if you go at the triad of congenital toxoplasmosis, what is the triad of the congenital toxoplasmosis? This is again very important. This gives you the hydrocephalus. Hydrocephalus can lead to the seizures. We can have chorioretinitis, okay, and along with this we have got the intracranial calcification. Now this is a typical triad. This was even asked in NEET. In 2019. But the important thing is that we have got congenital cataract here, but that is not the part of the triad. We have got the congenital cataract as well, but that is not the part of the triad. Very, very important. Okay. Now, what are the urine tests you are supposed to do? Urine test may we have to do the urine assay for the reducing substances, especially for the galactosemia. We have got amino acids in urine. Amino acids in urine, we are finding them in the Lowe syndrome. Now take that one by one. If the baby is having galactosemia, the enzyme for the galactose metabolism is deficient, and that is why we are having the what you called as reducing substances in the urine. This question, kind of a question, came in JIPMER. Okay, we had a similar question in JIPMER in 2020. If you remember, we had discussed this in the classes also. And if the baby is having the Lowe syndrome. Now, what is this Lowe syndrome? You must have heard this syndrome in the cases of your lenticonus also, posterior lenticonus. We are getting the posterior lenticonus, right, in Lowe syndrome. So actually its other name is oculocerebrorenal syndrome. Oculocerebrorenal syndrome. So it consists of three things. We have got oculo, we have got cerebro, and we have got renal. So this consists of amino acids in urine. So basically your horizon should be open, that when you are thinking about the cataract in a child, which is pediatric cataract, which is actually your bilateral non-hereditary kind of cataract. So you have to see that what are the blood tests and the urine test you have to do, and this is surely going to give you the questions. Okay, now second important thing that we are worried is the timing of surgery. What is the surgical technique? What is the type of optical rehabilitation for the aphakia that we are going to decide for the baby, whether glasses or contact lenses, intraocular lenses, and very, very important is your post-operative management, especially for the amblyopia. Because the chances of amblyopia are very, very high, dense amblyopia, especially in the cases of unilateral dense cataract. So that is again very, very important. Now treatment per se is not indicated in the developmental cataract unless the vision is considerably impaired. That is the dictum, because you know, for the surgeries you have to always run through a dictum. So the treatment is not indicated unless the vision is considerably impaired. That is a dictum we have to follow. If the cataract is central and reasonably good vision can be obtained through the clear cortex around it, child should be kept under mydriasis if required, with careful follow-up to monitor the acuity of the distant and near vision. Look for the progression of the cataract at least until the puberty. Now, they are saying that if the cataract is just in the central area, so we can hope for a reasonably good vision, okay, from the periphery. from the clear cortex. So what you can do, you can keep the pupil somewhat dilated so that the baby can see through the peripheral area, right? And you have to continuously keep on a track over the visual acuity of that child, both the distance vision and the near vision. It should not be deteriorating, and a fair amount of vision should be there from the clear cortex. You can continue it till the puberty. But obviously if it is large or if it is dense, you have to undertake the surgery there and then. Now decision of this issue depends upon whether the vision with the corrected refraction and retained accommodation is to be preferred to probably improve vision after operation without the accommodation. So basically, you know, you will have to individualize it. You will have to see how much of the vision baby is having, how much of the vision is expected after surgery, how much of accommodation is there. So they are clearly saying that a decision on this issue depends upon whether the vision with corrected refraction and retained accommodation is to be preferred to probably improved vision after operation without accommodation. Now you have got two options, whether to keep this much amount of vision along with accommodation, or to have the improved vision after the surgery without accommodation, because lens will be going, so you won't have the accommodation. So clearly you have got two things, you will have to see which one is better. Contact lenses can often be worn by relatively younger children or can be made available in the later life. So very small children are not able to handle the contact lenses, so definitely you will have to keep that option reserved for comparatively younger and adult children. Then we have got the intraocular lenses implanted during the primary surgery or secondarily at a later date. That could also be done. So we have spectacles, we have got contact lenses, we have got intraocular lenses. All these options are there, and according to the preference, according to the age, we have to give them. Then they are saying that it is not advisable to operate on lamellar cataracts until the child is 1 or preferably 2 years old. But when the lens is completely opaque or pupil is not dilating, or when the squint or nystagmus is developing. So when we are talking about the total dense cataract, yes, you have to do the surgery at the earliest. But if I do not have the total cataract, I have just a lamellar cataract, then that is not an emergency. And in those cases, I can wait for a child to grow up till 1 year of age or 2 years of age, okay. But when the lens is completely opaque or the pupil will not dilate, or when there is squint or nystagmus, it is wise to operate at an early age. So obviously that is common sense. If I have some of the complication along with it, that complication could be a squint, it could be a nystagmus or a pupil not dilating. So in that case, we can consider for the earlier surgery, but otherwise we can wait. Moreover, the results of the surgery in unilateral cataract in children are poor. So as far as prognosis is concerned, the results of surgery in cases of unilateral cataracts are poor, maybe due to the dense amblyopia, because obviously when we have got cataract on one side, we really have that preference, okay. One of the eyes, a preferred eye, other is not being used, and therefore there is high chances that eye will go into amblyopia unless the operation is carried out as early as possible within the first 6 weeks of the birth. So until and unless you are carrying out the surgery very early, if you remember, we discussed this, that the unilateral dense cataract should be operated as early as possible or as soon as feasible, urgently, U for unilateral and U for urgently, that is at most required, because the chances of the anisometropic, if you remember, in the unilateral we have got the chances of anisometropic amblyopia. Anisometropic amblyopia is very, very high, while in cases of bilateral, okay, none of the eyes are seeing, patient is not able to see by any of the eyes. So in that cases, we have more of stimulus deprivation. We have more of the stimulus deprivation amblyopia. So there are chances of amblyopia, of course, in both the kind of cataract, but if I talk about the unilateral, then we have got more chances of anisometropic amblyopia. When I talk about bilateral, then it is the stimulus deprivation amblyopia. All right. Then the critical period. The critical period for developing the fixation reflex in both unilateral and bilateral is between 2 to 4 months. Now, if you remember, we had this talk so many times in our classes also, that what is the critical period for the development of fixation reflex, and you people come up saying that different books say different things, and I always have one thing in common, that follow the standard textbook. So we always take all the data from this Parsons or the Yenov, and one or two things which are inappropriate from Parsons according to the Indian scenario, that I keep on telling you. Otherwise, the values of Parsons are quite standard. So this is your 2 to 4 months of age. Okay, always remember that this is the standard value. Any cataract which is dense enough to impair the vision must be which is developing before this age, because if any cataract which is dense enough, that will interfere with the fixation reflex, and if there is no fixation reflex, there will be no macular differentiation. Do you know that order? First will be the fixation reflex, then we have macular differentiation, and then the stereopsis. So obviously there will be a problem in the development of the stereopsis also, and the earliest possible time therefore will be preferred in cases of your dense cataract and that are occurring even before the development of fixation reflex, provided the child is otherwise medically fit for the general anesthesia. The use of contact lenses requires, now if I talk about the contact lenses, that requires the cooperation of interested parents. Even with their cooperation, binocular vision may be difficult to establish and amblyopia difficult to avoid. We can also think about contact lenses, okay, but there are two issues here. First of all, getting the consent from the parents for the fitting of contact lenses, then getting the cooperation from the child for the fitting of contact lenses, and escaping that amblyopia. You have to avoid that amblyopia, because when you have got difference in the refractive power in both the eyes, the chances of anisometropic amblyopia again very high. So there are certain problems that we face if we are treating it with the contact lenses. Now, if I come to the surgery itself, how can I treat? So the pediatric cataracts, they are usually soft and they can be aspirated, and that is why what we are doing, usually we are doing the lens aspiration. That is why usually we do is the lens aspiration. So you can aspirate it and look at the size of the incision, 1 to 1.5 in size. Okay, they can also be subjected to lensectomy through the pars plana. So I can do the phaco aspiration also, or that is also called as lens aspiration. The size of incision will be 1 to 1.5, and we can also go for the lensectomy through the pars plana using the vitreous cutting and aspirating instrument. The decision to insert the intraocular lens depends upon the age of the child, the laterality of the cataract, the surgeon's assessment of the family's ability to cope with handling a contact lens, and the personal preferences. So there are so many things which will help you, which will guide the surgeon to decide about the intraocular lenses. They clearly say that it is first the age of the child, then laterality, whether it is unilateral or bilateral, surgeon's assessment, what he thinks that family would be able to cope up with the contact lens or not. If yes, then we can give this intraocular lenses at a later stage. If we feel no, then we can provide it early, as well as the personal preferences also of the surgeon. Generally, intraocular lenses are favored whose ocular growth is almost complete. So that's why I say that usually we do not prefer it before the age of 2 years. Okay, that is a standard one, intraocular lenses, and in those with unilateral cataract. So two kind of people. If I look at the thing in the form of a question, so two kind of people are being given these intraocular lenses, one who are more than 2 years of age and one who are having the unilateral cataract. The intraocular lenses material. Now talking about the material of the intraocular lenses, generally what we are using is the PAMA. PAMA is your polymethyl methaacrylate, that is your PAMA. So usually we are using the rigid one-piece contact lenses are made up of that, which has been used for more than 40 years. Now we have got the foldable ones. The foldables, we have got the hydrophobic foldable acrylic polymer lenses. They are fast gaining the popularity. Now if you look at the style, so these intraocular lenses should be of single piece type, optics as well as haptics with one piece. So if you remember, we have got optics, the central area, and we have got the two hook-like structures. These are called as the haptics. So what is the difference? This optics part is the main part which is actually responsible for the refraction, and these are called as the haptics. Haptics are the hook-like parts which are actually responsible for the implantation. So we have got like these are your C-looped. These are your C-looped IOLs, which are by far the most popular design, but we have got different kind of designs which are available, right? These are available in one piece with the overall diameter, and the overall diameter what we are giving in the children. The overall diameter what we are giving in the children should not exceed 12 mm and should be fitted in the capsular bag. So capsular bag, you already know that intraocular lenses, the best site is the capsular bag in the posterior chamber. The implantation of anterior chamber intraocular lenses was discontinued in 1980s because there were a lot of complications due to the ACIOLs, secondary glaucoma and corneal decompensation. So we are not giving ACIOLs in children. The intraocular lens power is calculated according to the axial length and keratometry. Now the same formula we are using, the SRK formula, that uses the axial length also, that uses the keratometry reading also. Let's revise that formula, that P is equal to A minus 2.5 L minus 0.9 K, that we know, okay. And this power is calculated by the biometer, right? And what is this? Your A is your IOL constant. A is the IOL constant that we are using, and L is the axial length. L is the axial length. This is calculated by the A-scan ultrasound, and K is your corneal curvature. This is calculated by the keratometer. So we have got the A-scan ultrasound, keratometer, biometer. These are the things which are used for calculating the power. Ametropic power is prescribed for children more than 8 years. Now because you know, after 8 years the eye becomes ametropic, so for all the children who are more than 8 years I can use the same power, but we have to do the undercorrection for smaller children. So smaller children may, those who are actually, you know, less than 2 years, those who are less than 2 years, we have to do 20% undercorrection, and those between 2 to 8 years we have to do 10% undercorrection. Or in other way I can say that those who are, you know, less than 2 years, I have to give 80% of the correction, and those who are between 2 to 8 years, I have to give 90% of the correction or 10% undercorrection. So similar thing they are saying, that I will give 90% between 2 to 8 years and 80% less than 2 years. So I hope that is the same thing. Post-operative management may, you have to do the follow-up, you have to monitor the visual recovery, you have to give the treatment of the myopia, then we have to do the evaluation of the different complications also. Complications may, like we have astigmatism, we have fibrinous uveitis, secondary glaucoma, lens optic capture, posterior capsular opacification, cystoid macular edema, and the retinal detachment. Now these complications are more or less similar to that which are occurring in adults also, post-operative complications, but yes, one thing is there, that some of the complications are more common, especially if I talk about this posterior capsular opacification, and that is why we actually prefer doing what you called as the posterior capsulotomy. We prefer doing the posterior capsulotomy at that time only. This is called as the primary posterior capsulotomy. We prefer at the same time, because in cases of the children, the chances of posterior capsular opacification are really high. All right, now looking at the other congenital and developmental abnormalities of the lens, what we can have. So besides the various forms of the congenital cataract, we have got other things also which are related with the malformations of the lens. So if you look here, can you see the crescentic edge here, this crescentic edge? So this means this part is your lens, so this will be your phakic part. Is this visible here? Phakia, and this is your aphakia. Okay, so this is actually the subluxation. Subluxation of the lens is there, subluxation of the lens. So whenever you see this crescentic kind of a edge, this is your subluxation of the lens, right? Then we have got the anterior persistent primary hyperplastic vitreous. So here can you see the whitish reflex typical? You are seeing the leukocoria. This is due to the persistence of the primary vitreous. That's why you are seeing that whitish reflex. Then we have got something called as posterior lenticonus. We have got the posterior lenticonus, though it is not showing you very specific one, but you will have some conical type instead of the strict biconvex kind of a pattern. We have got the conical protrusion of the lens. This will be your posterior lenticonus. And see this typical is showing you, can you see the lenses here anteriorly, they have come up this. So there is actually what you called as the anterior dislocation. So and anteriorly both the lenses have displaced, that is your anterior dislocation. So it's always good to look at these pictures because again there is a high probability of these pictures being asked. Okay, now coming to the abnormal shape or size. So in a context to abnormal shape and size, one thing which is very common is your coloboma of the lens. So there is a knot shaped defect, coloboma of the lens. Actually, what do you mean by coloboma? So coloboma actually means the absence of the tissue. There is a absence of the tissue. So whenever we are having the absence of the tissue, I will get a notch because in that area I do not have the tissue. Usually it is unilateral and they are more common on the inferior side. They are unilateral and they are more common on the inferior side. So see here, inferior margin pay it's more common. Less frequently it can occur in some other part, and it is due to the defective development of the part of the sensory ligaments. So always remember two things: the colobomas are more common on the inferior side and they are usually unilateral. Then we have got the cataract which is associated with the anterior PHPV, that is persistent hyperplastic primary vitreous. A total cataract can be associated also. Now this is coming under the DDs also because that is also giving a whitish pupillary reflex and it can also lead to the development of this cataract. The posterior capsule of the lens may be invaded by the fibrovascular membrane and there can be a contracture because you know whenever we have got the fibrous tissue that can contract, that contracture can lead to the elongation of the ciliary processes, and the ciliary processes also starts becoming visible through the pupil. Okay, eyes usually microphthalmic, so it will also come under the DD of microphthalmos. Congenital rubella syndrome, that also gives you microphthalmos, right? The condition can be differentiated from retinoblastoma and retrolental fibroplasia. Now because it is giving a whitish pupillary reflex, as I told you before also, this thing becomes the DD of retinoblastoma also and ROP. ROP ka other name is retrolental fibroplasia. The presence of microphthalmos with elongated ciliary process. So this line, look at this line, they are giving you a diagnostic line. The presence of microphthalmos with the visibly elongated ciliary processes confirms the diagnosis of anterior PHPV. So that is good one. Okay, then we have got other things like we can have spherophakia, microspherophakia. These are the variants where the shape is abnormal. We are having a spherical shape of the lens. Here also we are having a spherical shape of the lens, and micro means smaller. So if I have only spherical lens, size is normal, it is spherophakia. If I have only the issue of the size, then it is microphakia. If I have both, then it is microspherophakia. It is frequently associated with the Weil-Marchesani syndrome. And see this, the patients here are stocky build and have small stubby fingers. Next pattern question. If you remember, I had given you a similar question in your fast track TND also. I told you there also that I framed the questions from the Parsons. So this will give you again an integrated question. The question will look as if it has come from medicine, pediatrics, and ultimately it will be landing up in ophthalmology or other way around, because this baby will be of Weil-Marchesani syndrome. Now Weil-Marchesani syndrome will also give you ectopia lentis, okay. So they can start up with ocular features, and they can end up asking you this the type of syndrome, or they can give you the systemic features and they can ask you the ocular features. In both the cases, you will have to first make the diagnosis of this syndrome. So this is again very, very important. Lenticonus. Now let's talk about the lenticonus. Lenticonus is an abnormal curvature of the lens. Surface is conical instead of spherical. You all know about keratoconus. Lenticonus similarly, it's more commonly posterior than the anterior, and posterior lenticonus is seen in the Alport syndrome. Now this is again a controversial line, and every time I take classes I told you this, that actually this statement is not wrong, but it is not very good statement. Why? Because you know, Alport syndrome is one syndrome that shows you both lenticonus, but anterior lenticonus is always more characteristic than the posterior lenticonus. So it is not a very good idea to give Alport syndrome in the example of posterior lenticonus. Posterior may you have to remember the Law syndrome, or anterior may you have to remember the Alport syndrome, okay. But because Parsons says posterior lenticonus, so that's why you have to remember this, that anterior is more characteristic. So even if they have given you both, it's always good to choose the anterior one, okay. Then we come to the ectopia lentis. Now this is your congenital dislocation or subluxation of the lens. I hope you remember what is the difference between the dislocation and the subluxation. It is a partial displacement, which is the subluxation. Usually it is upwards and bilateral. So it could be like inferior also, it could be unilateral also, but it is usually upwards and it is usually bilateral. You can remember it as the opposite of coloboma. Coloboma is usually unilateral, and on the inferior side this is usually upwards and bilateral. Lens displacement from its normal position is the subluxation of the lens. If there is a partial displacement, dislocation means complete displacement. Now the condition is often hereditary. If I talk about the acquired causes, the most common cause of subluxation of the lens is actually the trauma, but as they say, it is mostly hereditary. The lens is small, but the edge is generally invisible, and what is happening in most of the cases when the lens size is small, like we read this in the Weil-Marchesani syndrome, it is very, very common to have the displacement. Usually it is upward, but it could be on the inferior side also. The lens signs of subluxation will be seen, and then you can see it with arachnodactyly, that will be your Marfan syndrome. And in the Marfan syndrome, it is supratemporal subluxation, while it could also be with the homocystinuria, that is your inferotemporal subluxation. Now here I will say that again we have got the scope of the integrated questions here. You read Marfan syndrome at so many places. So different kinds of the symptoms, different kind of signs along with their genetic inheritance pattern along with the subluxation, all could be asked. So you have to be very, very careful. This is integrated question where so many of your subjects could be aligned, and same is your homocystinuria. They can ask you the enzyme deficient here in homocystinuria. It could be integrated with the biochemistry as well, okay. Right. Now, if we talk about this ectopia lentis, what is the etiopathogenesis? So the basic defect is the weakening of zonules. We all know that lens is held in its position with the help of ciliary zonules. So whenever we have got the subluxation of the lens, basically the defect is lying in the zonules only, and the degree of the displacement depends upon whether this affects only a sector or the local area or the entire circumference. So if I have got the lens here, okay, and I have got the zonules, okay, now how many zonules are affected, that will actually decide how much of displacement of or the subluxation is taking place. Now again, an important table, we have got so many causes of the ectopia lentis here. It could be familial causes, could be systemic causes, it can be secondary to eye diseases, or it could be trauma. So if I talk about the familial, now they have given you both. We can have dominant pattern, we can have the dominant pattern also, and we can have the recessive pattern also. So let's see the recessive one. Okay, the recessive ones are associated with iris coloboma and iridia, microspherophakia and ectopia pupillae. Why I have underlined this? It could be all except MCQ. It could be a all except MCQ, which of the conditions can be associated with the recessive pattern. Then I can have the systemic diseases. So this will give you the integrated questions. Integrated questions they can give you. We have the Marfan syndrome, the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, Weil-Marchesani syndrome, homocystinuria, sulfide oxidase deficiency and hyperlysinemia. Okay, then we have got eye diseases. So many eye diseases can also lead to ectopia lentis. We have uveitis, hypermature cataract. Now, can I ask you what kind of hypermature cataract? This is the question that you have to answer. That what kind of? We have two types of hypermature cataract. One is the Morgagnian and other is the sclerotic type. So that was the hint for you. So you will have to answer me in the comment section that which kind of hypermature cataract will actually lead to this ectopia. We have pseudoexfoliation syndrome, ciliary body tumors. So again, they will help you in the all except MCQs, and it could be trauma also, it could be syphilis also. Now let's talk about these syndromes individually. Like if I talk about the Marfan syndrome is autosomal dominant connective tissue disorder. I have having the skeletal disease system involved, cardiovascular and eye also. So obviously you could be asked an integrated question on this. Bilateral subluxation and which type? So pro-temporal subluxation is there. Bilateral subluxation of lens is common and retinal detachment is important complication after surgery. So can you see, they can ask you that which complication is actually expected after the surgery in these cases. So you have to first make the diagnosis of Marfan syndrome and then you will have to answer the retinal detachment. Then the second is your homocystinuria. Homocystinuria is a transmitted autosomal recessive, and what is enzyme deficient? It is the cystathione synthetase. So this also you should know, and if you remember, we always write this in our notes also, because you know what happens when you read these things in your biochemistry, that time you are not able to coordinate and not align those things that how they will be actually asked in ophthalmology. So when we read ophthalmology, I do remind you that see, so this could also be asked. Maybe it's not 100% sure that they are always asking you ectopia lentis as a cause of homocystinuria. They can be asking you the enzyme deficiency also. Making an integrated question, giving you the systemic features, the genetic inheritance pattern and so on. Then you will get the homocysteine in the urine, and you will have the dislocation of the lens. Even mental retardation is important, and then they can also ask you how will you test it. So it is detected by the cyanide nitroprusside test. So these are the related questions that can be asked. In this disease, ectopia lentis becomes more marked with the age. There could be glaucoma also, and there is a very strong tendency of these people towards the venous thrombosis. Venous thrombosis, like there we were having the retinal detachment, here I have a strong tendency towards the venous thrombosis. I have laxity of the joints, Marfanoid habitus. All those things are very important. So a good way of learning is that when you are learning all these things, open your notes of Marfan syndrome, and what you do, because you know more of Marfan syndrome you read there, note what are the ocular things that you are getting. So make a list there. I can get the ectopia lentis, I can get a blue sclera. So every time when you read the Marfan syndrome there, see, ocular features will always be reminded of, and when you are reading the Marfan syndrome in ophthalmology, you would be reminded of your systemic features. So that is a good way of learning in an integrated manner. Now if you look at the clinical features, obviously there is a subluxation of the lens, so I am going to have the poor vision, but a very important thing is a uniocular diplopia and glare. Now we read uniocular polyopia in cases of early cataract. Remind of you that here you will not be having polyopia, you will be having diplopia, because I showed you that you will be having a crescentic edge. So above that edge I will be having the phakic area, I will be seeing through the lens, and below that area I will be having aphakia. So this will be typically uniocular diplopia, then I will have the glare. And because you know there is a subluxation, so I will have the myopia, astigmatism and reduced amplitude of accommodation. So this could be asked as a question, that what are the things that could be expected out of a person who is having the subluxation of the lens. Obviously loss of vision or the poor vision will be there. Signs may, you will appreciate the displacement of the lens when you do the slit lamp examination. And then associated with this, I will have the phacodonesis and iridodonesis, because subluxation of the lens most probably occurs due to the weakening of zonules. And if you look here, this is your iris, okay, then we have the ciliary body here, and this is the lens, and the zonules are holding. So obviously if these zonules are weak, then this lens will subluxate. So this will be your phacodonesis. This will be phacodonesis. Phaco means lens and donesis means the shivering or the tremulousness, and in turn they are also attached to the iris. So I will have the irido, that is iris donesis. So I will have the iridodonesis also, I will have the phacodonesis also. Then the vitreous may be there, the vitreous may be there to herniate forward into the anterior chamber, and glaucoma due to the pupillary blockade. Now what is happening, because lens is moving, so obviously what is happening now, if there is an anterior subluxation, there could be herniation of the vitreous also, and if this lens is moving anteriorly, there will be this pupillary blockade. So due to the pupillary blockade, I can have the glaucoma. So that glaucoma will be called as the phacotopic. This will be called as the phacotopic glaucoma. So you know about the phacomorphic glaucoma, we know about the phacotoxic glaucoma. This is your phacotopic glaucoma. We were also having the phacolytic glaucoma. Do you remember? Then the posterior displacement of the lens into the vitreous will cause the lens induced uveitis, but it will not cause glaucoma. So anterior subluxation of the lens is going to cause different set of problems, posterior dislocation is causing the different set of problems. Finally we come to the treatment if anteriorly dislocated with the inverse glaucoma. Now if the lens is going anteriorly with inverse glaucoma, do you remember what was inverse glaucoma? Inverse glaucoma was your ciliary block glaucoma. This was your ciliary block glaucoma, which was also called as the malignant glaucoma. So that was occurring due to the misdirection of your ciliary zonule. So if there is anterior dislocation and that is also leading to your inverse glaucoma, the patient obviously will be treated as emergency. Lens removal is indicated, but obviously after controlling the intraocular pressure. If the lens is subluxated, the extent is assessed, refraction through the aphakic portion is performed to give the best possible correction. Then if it is not an emergency, there is only a subluxation, you have to assess how much is the vision loss, you have to look through the aphakic area, and accordingly you have to give the refraction and correction. And if the lens is going posteriorly dislocated and there is uveitis, again you will remove. If there is no uveitis, then you can leave it there. If the vision is poor due to the excessive lenticular astigmatism or the lens excess in the visual axis, then also you have to remove. If there is uveitis, then also you have to remove. If there is a glaucoma, then also you have to remove. If any of these deformities cause the great visual disability, we can also do the lens aspiration or the lensectomy. So a very important thing, I think this could come as a short note kind of a question, a long answer type of a question also. It could be asked as a total clinical case based scenario. You have to first identify what is the cause here, what will be the clinical features, what are the other things that we can expect in this person, how will you manage this case, depends upon the complications which are developing. So overall, an interesting and important topic of ectopia lentis here. So that's all for this session. I hope some of the beautiful and important concepts you have understood them well. Keep on reading the Parsons along with me, a very small initiative that I have taken because I honestly want you to read the standard textbook and a pearl-like book like Parsons. So keep reading, stay safe, stay happy, be motivated, and keep on reading ophthalmology with me. Thank you and happy ophthalmology.